episode number 121. I am Kathleen Wiley. Who am I, right? I am Kathleen Wiley. And I am a Jungian psychoanalyst in North Carolina. And I am here with Deborah Henson-Conant, a composer, mentor, harpist, and fantastic harpist. We both play the harp, and that's why we call this Jung at Harp. Every week, we come together with a question that we want to explore, and we invite you to explore that with us. You can add chats in on the platform that we're on, and then we can read those. And our question today has to do with Enantiodromia. So, DHC, would you like to give them the exact title?
I wrote it down. Okay, let me see here. Enantiodromia. E-N-T. Okay. The tendency of things to transform into their opposite. Now, this came up because at the beginning, every Friday we get together and we were like, okay, what do we want to talk about today? And I can't even remember how we got to opposites. But you were, but we are, here we are. And we realized that it's a big part of my life. So one of the things that happened to me in the last couple days is that I've joined this new class that's all about team building, and I've been in it before, but now I'm in it again, and it's got a clearing process. And I had the experience yesterday of being cleared for something that I was about to do that I was really scared to do. And I went through this process that I've gone through 100 or 200 or 1,000 times before, and yet something shifted for me, and I was able to, in a sense, literally let go of. I had the experience of letting go of this whole persona that I've been holding on to. And I could experience that was happening, and walk into conversations and actually be present in a way I had not been present before. And so I asked you about this, and I can't remember exactly what I asked you about, but it was such a fundamental feeling to think, I'm this kind of person who's not good at this, and I can't do this, and I'm really bad at this. And, and to have that, to let that go, to see that was something separate from me.
Right.
And to step into a conversation in a very different way. Now, in The Golden Cage, my musical, there are two characters on the inside and the outside. And we were also talking about how we're both fascinated with inside and outside. And then I was like, wait, is there another side besides inside and outside? And in the show, The Golden Cage, one character is inside a golden cage and the other character is outside the golden cage. The one on the inside wants to be out. The one on the outside is hungry to be in. And through the course, they change places. They are evil to each other. They are good to each other. And finally, they actually complete and become, in a sense, one, which for me as the writer is very powerful, because they originally were two sides of me, which split off and became two characters, and then acted, worked through all of this in this drama. So if you go see The Golden Cage, you're basically seeing, my inner life for the last, 30 or 40 years played out as two characters, inside and outside, and then outside and inside, and finally connected.
Yeah. I'm thinking part of how we got to this is we were playing with transformation, and you had this transformative experience. And I was saying that transformation is ultimately an organic process, that no matter how much the ego and all of our goal-directed reason and logic wants to think we can make something change inside of us, it is ultimately an organic process. And that led us to musing about this principle in Greek philosophy of Enantiodromia, which means the tendency of things to meet their opposite. So inherent in that is it's all interconnected. It's all one. And so in some ways, when we find ourselves caught between, do I hold on to this, in your case, negative persona, and I can't, or do I hold on to this desire and imaginative vision I have that I can, that in truth, those two things have to be held together they have to come together in order for something to shift. And it sounds like you engaged in what I would call a ritual yesterday, or a
Mhm.
practice or a ceremony that facilitated that.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because I know that that's part, or I think it's part of your work, and it's been something that we've been developing in Hip Harp Academy
Mhm.
in a project called, we first called it ambient improv exploration, and then we opened it up to another part, which is we called random acts of harping. But it's basically the taking on of a practice. Um, and practice is
Mm.
the fifth string in the strings of passion. And practice always has two sides. One is we practice to get something. We're like, I want to learn how to play that thing, I'm going to practice. The other side is we take on a practice in order for it to get to us.
Yes.
And now I forgot what we're talking about.
Well, we're talking about what happens when the inner and the outer come together, and how we're
Oh,
really, I think, talking about, and how do we facilitate that?
right, right. And so you said this was part of a ritual or something that I've done for a long time that it felt like it was having an impact on me, but
Mhm.
certainly not like yesterday. It's almost like, you know, those old commercials about, that stuck stuff on your pan and you soak it and you soak it and you soak it, or like if you and it kind of comes off, but it doesn't all come off. And then
Yeah,
one day it just like, oh, it just lifts off. And what was on your pan and what is your pan are separate,
yeah.
whereas they were the same thing for so long.
Yeah, there's so much in what you're saying. I wanna start, though, with what you said about the taking on a practice and letting the practice get to you.
Mm.
My essential embodiments practices is open for people to join, to start on June 21st. So if you're watching this in real time, and part of what we do for 6 months is each month there is a practice that, we do, and we do separately, and then we come together twice a month to talk about that and look at how to support ourselves in that and what's happening. But the idea, for instance, the first practice is body awareness, which sounds so simple, but people really don't know what's going on in their bodies. But the practice of that every day for 30 days does something that suddenly translates to when you're standing at the grocery store and the line starting to get aggravated, that you tune into your body in a way you didn't. Or when you find yourself in a situation where someone begins to yell and you would normally collapse and crumble or yell back, but you go into your body in a way that allows you to access something more, the other possibilities. So part of what happens when opposites come together, a practice we're doing as a practice, ego thinks, okay, I'm going to do this to make this happen. But suddenly then the practice has us and makes us happen. And those opposites come together and there's something bigger than we've been. There's an expanded consciousness. Something shifts inside of us. And it's to me, it's like, akin to psychic gardening. I mean, I always am using gardening as a metaphor, you know? We can't make things in our garden grow. We can't make things in our psyche grow, but we can do the gardening, and the work of gardening makes a big difference, as we all know.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
as we all
Right.
know.
It's interesting because I noticed that you're talking about a circular process in a sense that
Yes.
I mean, just like with our garden, that we do this every year, and then there are perennial plants that come back and things
Mhm.
that either deteriorate or whatever is the opposite of deteriorating. And I'm thinking about the development of language, and I'm thinking about what's happening in your embodiment practices, and Hip Harp Academy, in that in the academy there's 4 quarters, and each quarter we're exploring music from a different standpoint, which reminds me
Mhm.
a lot of what you're doing. And I noticed that people are saying, like, the first quarter was grounded expansion. So we're looking at everything and everything in terms of how can we ground here and where can we allow ourselves to expand. And the next quarter, it's all about the power of pattern. Now, these things all fit together. It's not like one is different than the other, but and eventually, what I heard you saying is what I'm seeing happening for people in the academy, which is it becomes your language and you are able to actually be self-expressed with this. You're no longer trying to get the thing right.
Right.
The
That's right.
thing now becomes a vehicle for self-expression, a vehicle for connection.
Right.
Now, and I would like to talk about inside outside here, because the whole concept of strings of passion is that
Right.
you are taking on a practice on the outside that then builds almost like a mirror image on the inside. And these two things are what become a rich, self-expressed, free person. Without
Right.
these two things, you're
Right.
not free.
No, that's absolutely right. I'm thinking about in alchemy, they have a concept of circling the energy. And this is a part of, again, that process of the tendency of things to come to their opposite. So there are energies inside of us that want expression outside, and there are outside energies that come in and affect us. And when we can consciously tend that process, which the embodiment practices and the embodiment circle allow you to do, and your strings of passion and taking on a practice allow you to do, then I think of it as it's like we're put ourselves in the greenhouse, and so we're able to speed up the cycle of growth, but it also means we're on the hot seat more.
It's like, and what I'm hearing is
Yeah.
we become the plant that we are tending.
Yeah. Yeah, and, before we got on camera, when we were bouncing this around between us, I was thinking about in my own life, trying to relax into improving. And, I'm an adult coming to the harp, and I mean, even after 10 years, I consider myself to be early intermediate player. I mean, I wish I could say it after 10 years I was advanced, but the truth is this, I have a full professional life, and so I love the harp, and my time with it peaks and wanes. But one of the things that I've really appreciated about what I've done with Hip Harp Academy and our time is that when I can practice the snippets, or I can even do a practice like inversions every time that I sit down at the harp, 5 minutes of doing inversions and C, the key is C, D, and G, because those are the keys I play in most often. Then I've found myself, particularly over the last 3 years, when I go to jam with friends, and all of a sudden, I'm just doing an inversion. I'm not thinking about it, but it's like my left hand just finds it. And I think that's an example of something on the outside I'm doing, the practice of the inversions, getting into me. It's then just there. And in the moment of the music and the moment of playing, it just happens. And I think that part of what you really give people the outside roadmap to and the practices for is to learn how to relax and let the music come through them, so that there's this outside, the practices, whether it's the snippets, it's the improv with the nightscapes, landscape backgrounds.
Oh,
um,
soundscape background, the soundscape.
Soundscapes,
Yeah, yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
The soundscapes that, y y I'm sorry, I had an intruding thought, which is I had a breakthrough with the soundscapes when I was at the gym, and I was just listening to them, and all of a sudden, I found myself in my head as I listening, responding. It's like it freed something up in me that I was able to take back to the harp that sitting at the harp didn't. And, and I can theorize what that probably was. But anyway, it's an interesting, I'm just, it's interesting that somewhere the outer and inner, the outer harp, I froze, but the inner harp, I was able to relax with it.
Right, and I wanna bring this back to the word embodiment. So
Yeah.
what I'm hearing that you did is that you were you got away from the fussiness and the like. I mean, this is a prosthetic. It's not something that we were born with. I have it
Mhm.
that the harp is a prosthetic for my fingers, for the voice that my fingers never were not born with. And but integrating with that can be very discombobulating.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it sounds like what you did by probably being in a kind of dreamy state and thinking about it, and you may have been thinking about your fingers, or you may have been just thinking of voice, and that connection was made
Yes.
to actual free self-expression. And I had that experience, and I think other people in the well, two things. First of all, sometimes I have people, a lot of times, just play by gesture. And I
Mhm.
say, shut off the sound and just watch what this looks like. Do not try to play the right notes. It's a gesture. And another thing akin to that, which is very similar to what you experienced, is
Mhm.
others, like when I played the harp, I had started off on the piano, not with lessons, but improvising. Then I played the harp, learned a
Mhm.
lot more about jazz on the harp, became a jazz harpist, sat down at the piano one day and could suddenly do things that I had
Ah.
never practiced. And it was unearthly. It was like one of those dreams you had when suddenly you can do something. And what had happened is my understanding of music
Mhm.
had shifted. And then my body had been able to transfer it from one instrument to another.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing is that's what happened to you. It transferred from a place of freedom,
Yes.
which was you in the gym and you with
Yeah.
your body, in its largeness, to that, to what it would be like when you then have that technical. And I'm just going to say one more thing here, which is I know that, and I love AI. I use it in some ways, although we could talk about that. But I was hearing on the radio, that AI will be over, some of the things that we do with our hands we will no longer be doing them. And I
Mm.
would just like to say that if that's happening to you, pick up an instrument as quickly as you can, because
Absolutely.
yeah, because that integration with a tool and an instrument is a very advanced and beautiful tool, that is part of our humanity, and being able to embody ourselves and be expressed, and exactly what we're talking about today, which is that place where the outside and the inside meet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I can remember actually the moment I was in the gym, I was doing free weights. And so I was in a large room where there are weights, and I was in the front of the mirror looking at my form. And so it's really what was going on is I wasn't even thinking about what I was going to do, but I was listening, and it was an organic response.
Right.
And what you said about a dreamy state, I think this is important because, of course, in Jungian psychology, the opposites we're always looking at are what does the unconscious run into consciousness and consciousness merge into the unconscious. And there are these two inner and outer realities of our own psyche. What's going on unconsciously, we have no awareness of cognitively, and what's going on consciously that we have cognitive awareness of. And there's a beautiful book by a science writer that I may have mentioned before, Annie Murphy Paul. The name of the book is The Extended Mind, Thinking Beyond the Brain. And the book is split into three sections. She talks about thinking with the body, thinking with the environment, and thinking with other people. And this, what she does is she cites research over the last 20 years that shows that thinking is something that isn't just a function of brain and brain chemistry. And one of the statements she makes in there is that the research shows that people who are more aware of what's going on in their body have greater access to their unconscious knowledge. Now, that to me is a powerful statement, that people who are aware of what's going on in their body have more access to their unconscious, their unknown cognitive knowledge. And So, in the embodiment circle and with the embodiment practices, that first practice of body awareness is so foundational for our transformation, whether it's as a harpist or a musician or as a person, as a lover, a friend, a boss, a manager, an accountant, a creative, whatever. Because the unconscious will always know more than consciously we can. I mean, think about it. You were telling me about a podcast you were listening to yesterday, and I just told you about a book I read. There's always so much more we can learn. So,
Wow. Okay. So there's so much there. And I know we have like 3 minutes.
okay.
And I mean, so I will not ask. Well, I'm just going to ask this question, but I know you can't answer, which is, well, how do we know the difference between consciousness and between the conscious and the unconscious? 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Well, sometimes we don't, but typically consciousness, and from a psychological perspective, is whatever feels connected to a sense to ego, to the sense of self that we consider ourselves to be. And unconscious is that which feels not us and
Well,
emerges unbidden.
Okay. So yesterday, when I was able to somehow give up
Mhm.
all this stuff that I thought was me and step into, like I don't like the future now, the
Mhm.
future was already now. And then, so was I stepping into my unconscious? What?
I think what was happening is you were clearing a space so that the larger self that you are, which is includes the unconscious, was able to I'm just going to say it this way, to give you a download of new energy. So in a way, the ego self, the persona ego self dissolved into the larger self, which is always more unconscious. And immediately in that dissolution, then a new ego self that was more expanded, different, emerged. You felt different, but
It
there was
did.
that moment of what the alchemists call dissolution.
What you just said something a minute ago. You said new energy, and it
Yes.
did feel
Yeah.
as if whatever energy I had was a new energy.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And this is what, Jung talked about this, what we're talking about, the holding, when we can consciously hold the tension of the opposites. This is who I am, and this is what I know about me, but I'm opening to something beyond that, those opposites, that then the organic process he called the transcendent function can kick in and a uniting third emerges. And you experienced that yesterday. But what do we do to get there? We can't make it happen, but we hold the opposites. You held your experience of who you are and your ideal about who you are, and you held on to that desire and that sense and vision that there was something more of who you really are. And it allowed those two things to come together.
Right. Or I would say my experience was I let go of everything I think of who I am.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then that allowed this other to step to step in.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, on that note, Kathleen, thank you so much for this conversation. And I hope that everybody who has been here today or who watches it later has enjoyed this journey and will join us again almost every Friday at around 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in hopefully LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and other Facebook places as we add them. Thank you so much for joining us for Jung at Harp, and we look forward to seeing you next week when we explore we don't even know what.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Kathleen.